Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this session. My name is Stephen Flower. I'm an IATI specialist in the Centre for Humanitarian Data in OCHA and also Open Data Services Cooperative. And the session today is, we're very grateful to the Secretariat and Sander and the team for helping us combine a couple of ideas into one session. So with the overarching theme of finding data in IATI that cross-cuts data. And my first request to everybody really is, can somebody find a better term than cross-cutting data? So if you can think of something better that suggests this, please put that in the chat or elsewhere, because yeah, cross-cutting data. Okay. What we've got a really interesting case study from the team at SEBI-Livestock to describe how they've used IATI data to look at their theme of livestock. And we're going to look at their work and enjoy that. And then we've got a panel from colleagues from the World Bank, USAID, and the European Commission to talk about their experiences of using IATI data, particularly on this idea of cross-cutting themes. Okay, so before we start, I've got excuse me, a few slides to try and put this into some sort of context. When I started back with IATI back then, in November 2011, conveniently 11 years ago this month, there were just 5 organizations that published IATI data. And as you can see, there were a mixture of organizations, but it was just 5. You could count them on one hand, literally. So IATI was very small back then. Now, if you look at IATI, I had a look at the statistics that come from the D-Portal website. It's much bigger. So there are millions of activities, millions of budgets, millions of transactions, just for example. So IATI has really grown from the handful of data at the very beginnings to a much bigger data set that's really quite phenomenal. So I don't believe that people need all the data all at once anymore. I don't think we need to have all of IATI data to do everything. So very often you can use things like D-Portal and filter the data by country, as we heard in the keynote. Filter it by Liberia activities or Bangladesh. So it's very straightforward, and I think there's more and more common ways that people use IATI data, but use subsets of the data. We don't need all that data all at once, it seems. And the IATI standard is really helpful for this, I think. And we found we can use countries, as we've just seen, but we can also use, for example, sectors and policy markers, and elsewhere we can use SDGs. And there are various ways that we can filter and find perhaps one activity, as I found here in agricultural cooperatives and certain policy mark around climate change. We can use the functions of the IATI standard to really filter down what we want to find, and that's really helpful and really useful. But in other cases, such as with the COVID-19 pandemic in the past few years, we've had to use different parts of the IATI standard to try and find that data. There was no one single way to find COVID-19, as there isn't one single way to find, for example, food security or even livestock. We have to use a combination of ways to filter the data to get to that set of activities that we want to use and work with. So cross-cutting themes is exactly that. How do we find these things that are not pinned down directly in the data? How do we get to them? And I think this is quite common to many of the uses that we're finding, and maybe some of the sessions today. I don't believe, and this is what I want to test in a moment with people, I don't think what we want to do is add a new data field, a brand new data field for every time somebody has an idea of a theme or a need to find data. So I don't believe we want IATI to look like this. Is it COVID? Yes or no. Livestock? Yes or no. Women's economic empowerment? Yes or no. DFI, etc., etc. We don't want to make the data standard become so big and so unwieldy for every theme. I really don't think that's what we want to do, and I'm going to test that in a moment with you. Let's see. So I think today is about using what we have, using the scaffolding that we have already around the standard. Maybe we can tweak it and enhance it, but using what we have to find what we need, as opposed to endlessly building upon the standard. And we're going to hear, as I said before, we're going to hear from colleagues at SEBI-Livestock, and then 3 colleagues to talk about their experiences of doing this as well. And before we do that, I want to just go back to that question here. Do we need to add a new data field for every theme? So Gary, if you could launch the first poll. We've got 2 polls in this session, very exciting. So the question for everybody, and if you can quickly choose your choice, should we continually introduce a new and dedicated data field to the IATI standard for each and every theme? Should we add something for livestock, add something for DFI, etc.? So a yes, no, or you're not sure. And a couple more seconds to think, just respond to that idea. Do we have to add a new data field every time? And I appreciate some of the more technical colleagues in the audience might disagree with my phrasing here, but it'd be interesting to see what you think, and I'll give that 10 more seconds. Do we need to add a new data field for every time we've got a cross-cutting theme to this? I think, Gary, let's have a look at the results. And thank you, Gary. This is exciting. So, no. Okay, so we've got a few people thinking yes, that's completely legitimate, of course. Most people no, and then a few not sure. That's really helpful. Thank you very much, colleagues. So I think, yeah, the majority of people are thinking we don't need to add specific things for certain themes, because we can try and use what we have. But the challenge is, how do we use what we have? And so it's really helpful, first of all, to hear from colleagues Louise, Vanessa, who are with us, who are going to talk about the SEBI-Livestock project, and then we'll return back to the panel and have a bit more of a discussion about it. So, Louise, I'm going to stop sharing now. Thank you, everybody, and I will mute. This is all very seamless. Okay, thank you, Louise. Great.
Thank you, Stephen. And firstly, good morning, good afternoon, and thank you very much, the IATI community, for inviting us to present here. We're delighted to be here and to present our experiences with IATI data. And so we're going to present today on the Livestock Project Portal, and it's answering for us who's funding what where. 3 of us are here on the call today. So myself, the senior data scientist on the project, but Alup's joined as well. And he's the data scientist that actually developed the database, the dashboard, and the code to connect to IATI. And then also Vanessa, who you'll be hearing from shortly, who's our communications knowledge exchange specialist. And one of the things that's been really important for us is actually communicating our work to our community and saying what a great resource IATI data has been for us. So you're going to be hearing from us all. We represent SEBI-Livestock. It's a livestock data project funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we're based at the University of Edinburgh in the vet school. And so we've divided up the presentation into 4 sections. Firstly, to give a bit of background about why we developed this portal in the first place, and why data-driven decision-making is so important to what we do. Then we'll talk a little bit about why we actually decided to use the IATI data, and how it's been such an incredible data source to help us create this tool to help users coordinate investment choices. And then finally, we'll sort of dive into what we've produced, a little bit about how we access the IATI data, the dashboard, and to feed back some of our feedback that we've collected from our community, and then sort of wrap up a little bit on our community and how much we're sort of keen to engage with the IATI community to really, as you said, think about how that existing infrastructure could be, can really be enhanced. So, as I said, we're a livestock data project where we've been going for about 6 years. And one of the things that's central to what we do is mobilizing and improving data and evidence to help the livestock community make better investments through data-driven decisions. And so a lot of our work is around really understanding what are the issues that our users have, what type of questions they need answering, and looking to see if data can help answer some of those questions. And it's a lot around trying to find the best available data. And I think IATI for us has really sort of landed there. It's the best available data source to help answer this question around who's funding what where and developing that landscape map of investments. We focus a lot on communication strategies because we want to make sure that the data and the visualizations that we create from the data is actually communicated to our community and actually matches their needs. And one other thing that is part of our project is we're actually the secretariat for LD4D, which is a community of practice of livestock practitioners, and it represents some livestock donors, also a lot of other people receiving funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation who are working with livestock, and some NGOs. And really we're set up to really think about how can we have better livestock decision making in low and middle income countries and through improved data and analytics. We have annual meetings, and you'll hear a little bit about that later on. And this particular photograph was taken 2-3 years ago when we had our annual meeting in Rome at the FAO offices. So we're quite a vibrant, dynamic community who really want to use data to improve livelihoods. And so this particular dashboard that we're presenting today is really a tool created for and by the community. So really we started at the beginning of this work, it was really to think about what questions need answering by the data. And one of the big things is really just understanding what projects are active, what livestock projects are happening, or what projects have happened in the past. And this is really important to help users on donors or implementers sort of coordinate their activities. And actually finding this data is really difficult. When we've spoken to people, typically it's almost sort of through your network, you find out who's working on what, and so it's really not easy to find this information, even within organizations. Sometimes they say big organizations, it's not clear who's doing what. And so by finding IATI data, we were very excited to see that there are a few things that are really important for us that IATI deliver on. So one is, it's for the publishers that do publish the data, it's very comprehensive. So we've been able to see a lot of the a lot of our community members represented there. We know what projects they've got. It's also timely. So another thing that people mentioned was once in a while, there's sometimes these exercises where people find out what projects are happening. But then it's quite static. And so the timeliness of the IATI data is great. Also, it's trusted. It's a large organization. So there are a lot of things that made it a great data source, and what we could say is it's the best available data source. And by using it and by answering that question, who's funding what where, we aim to support decision making so that better investments are made because there's better coordination. But one of the sort of big feedbacks we get is a lot of our users are really busy. They haven't got time to go through lots of data, and what they want is at a glance, very quickly, what's the key messages. And so we created, we do a lot of work around interactive dashboards, and so we created a dashboard specifically on IATI data that we found connected to livestock, and we'll talk a bit about that later. But this map to the right is the type of map that you'll see in the dashboard, and it's showing at a glance that you can see that there's a lot of there's been a lot of investment in Ethiopia. So as I said, we really want to support data-driven decisions, and we sort of targeted there's 3 sort of personas, user types that we know this is important for. So the donors. We know that actually for them to find sort of gaps in funding is very important so that they can then actually target resources effectively. And when we've spoken to some funders, things like understanding who's working in a particular country, what projects are on the ground is happening is very important. But also, and so that's a way of them building partnerships and sort of finding out on the ground what type of things are working, but also for their particular domain. For example, it could be a vaccine delivery project for livestock. Finding out in other countries what's happening is very important. The governments is something that we know that this, through other people, it's important, but we haven't had much, we haven't showed this to any governments, but it was very interesting in the plenary session to hear the the speaker talk about why this is an important resource. IATI is an important resource for governments. And some of the feedback we've had is that it would also be useful for some of the government departments working with livestock to understand what's happening in their countries. And then finally, as we call them grantees, this is really project implementers. For them, it's also important because they can use it to find partners. Often some of the, when people first start out on investment, they want to learn from others. And so finding people that have just successfully finished a project or are underway can sort of help them get some lessons learned. And this image to the right, you'll see it in the dashboard, is just really how we've taken some of the livestock activities and just mapped them out, and you can toggle between, this is the funder view, but you can toggle between the sort of publisher type, whether it's a government or a foundation, and then it'll list the name, and we'll show that. So Alup, who I think has joined us now, is the data scientist who developed the dashboard and accessed the data, and is very much sort of, it's his work, and he created 2 videos for us. So the first video is a little bit about the data pipeline, and then the second video is sort of a showcase of the tool. So as you can see, there's sort of 3 different stages to it. So we access the API, and we have some Python code. And the way Alup's written the code is that we can actually, we're querying on sector codes, but he's sort of made it quite adaptable so we can switch the query code. So it's pretty much access the API, extract the data, store the data, and then we visualize it. So that's how we've accessed the data, and I think we've had a very positive experience. And then the next video is the dashboard that we produced from it. So this is our landing page, and we've created 3 views of the data, and we'll explore each of those views in this video. So the publisher view, this is something that is of interest to other donors, because then they can find out what other donors are sort of working in particular countries or in particular domains. You can see this is the there's a toggle button, the organization type or the organization. And so we're showing the organization, and this is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who we get funding from. And we have these filters, and they're standard across the different dashboards. And so you can filter on a country, on a particular publisher. The implementer, we're in there as an implementer, the University of Edinburgh, but also the activity status is quite important as well. People were saying, is a project currently active, or has it just been recently completed? So it's a way, based on feedback from our users, this is the type of information they need. And then the search description is a free text search. And so we've just put data in there, and that's us there. So this is where it's starting to link a little bit with those cross-cutting themes. We've been thinking about how can we explore IATI data with certain terms to really sort of hone in on particular activities. One thing we're mindful of is making sure that the term is being used in the description, and it's something that for our next round we'll be exploring. This is the country view, and so it's sort of, we have a map that looks like Ethiopia already filtered, which is, I think, the country where the most livestock activities have been. A similar type of thing, we just got the table of activities there. And again, we're searching for vaccines. So these are the type of things that might be interesting. And then we can just filter for countries. It's just a way of letting users slice and dice the data depending on what they are interested in, and completion, implementation. And then the year. So what was interesting is that when we've shown this to users, all of the dashboards they've been interested in, I think the country was something they were very interested in, but even the year is helpful just to see over time what's been funded, that sort of time element. So again, it's a similar thing. Now, one thing we flagged is sort of interesting on a sort of a data quality thing. We did notice one of two 1900s, and that's sort of a default, I think, if the year is blank. But what we've deliberately done is we haven't wanted to change any of the data because it is IATI data and we want to feed back. And then this final dashboard is just the sector code. So one thing that was actually of interest to users is as well, with livestock, what other sector codes come in? And then this is just showing our website. And we also had a request to look at fisheries, aquaculture data. And so we could look at some fisheries codes. So the way the dashboard's been designed and the data's been designed, the calls to the data, we can sort of basically do subsets of the data. And this is what we'll be exploring more. And this is where it sort of segues into some of that sort of cross-cutting themes that we're basically being fed back of interest, which we'll just quickly touch upon here. So we've engaged with our community and we had some pre-launch sessions very much targeted with 2 funders and some implementers. And I think generally the view was it was very user-friendly. They would use it to find livestock projects, which is currently difficult to find. I don't think many people had heard of IATI data, and they were saying what an incredible data resource this is. So it was a huge interest to the community because it's solving a problem, a real data problem that people didn't realize that there was IATI to help solve. I think cross-cutting themes was definitely something that came up. People were mentioning things like One Health, AMR, particularly with COVID and zoonoses. This is something that's quite important to the livestock sector and human health as well. So we haven't explored it that much, but we're guessing that that could be one of those sort of, we're guessing that there isn't a sector code for One Health. I don't know, but it could be something that it's definitely a cross-cutting theme where people had interest. And then we actually had a community, we had our annual community meeting in September, and it was an open session, and we were really delighted to have Sarah McDuff there, who actually talked about IATI, and there was a lot of interest from the community about IATI data. And we also heard from our donor who was saying that this is actually solving a real need. And so we sort of gave a presentation for 20 minutes and then opened it up to Menti and actually tried to get feedback. And we were saying, would you use this? And a lot of the audience said yes. And we said, well, how? And things like gluts and gaps in investments was of interest. Are there gaps in livestock investments that could be filled? People were saying they could use it to find project partners. You can find out who's working what where. So if you were going into country, who else is working there? I think there was interesting geography mapping, just sort of seeing what was going on in sub-Saharan Africa. And there was another comment around it'd be interesting to use some of the existing projects to see how successful they'd been, to see if they could be scaled up or replicated elsewhere. So there was definite interest in the data source. Other cross-cutting themes that came up for our area was animal welfare, food safety. We had a lot. We've sort of got all the analysis, but people also say it'd be interesting to see who wasn't reporting. I mean, I know we've had a few comments like, well, is the private sector represented there? So I think it was also of interest just to see where the gaps were. But I think sort of generally, it was a huge sort of endorsement that this was a really, really valuable resource for us. And we have a recording. So I'm going to hand over to Vanessa now, who will tell us a bit more about sort of our community work.
Great, thanks so much, Louise. Just to add a little bit of context to what she's described, we really feel like this is a story about connecting communities. So LD4D, Livestock Data for Decisions, is a community. IATI is a community, as we are discovering. And so the central question is, what is the value of these communities to each other? LD4D has a very specific domain, which is livestock, and this represents a thematic use case for IATI data. Through the dashboard interface, the members of the LD4D community can put the IATI data to the test its value proposition. So that question being, can the data answer our questions? Can it guide decision-making and activities? As Louise described, we are engaging with our community members and also the funders in our community to ensure that the data we present via the project portal is useful and can lead to usable insights. We're also able to feedback to IATI on data quality and usability and any other issues. So we see it as a very symbiotic kind of connection. We are still very early in the journey, so the data has not yet been used to guide decisions, but the ambition is to inform better investment decisions and generate positive impacts for food security and livelihoods. So we really look forward to continuing with this connection and conversation among communities. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. So really, this is the last slide, and it was just sort of next steps for us and some reflections. So next year, we'll be continuing to explore IATI data. One thing that's quite important for us is to understand activities, what country, if they're linked to countries. And I think there's a bit more work we can do there because there's some region data just to narrow perhaps the geographical focus down. Another area that we're really interested in is are there sort of links to project reports through IATI? There may be some sort of more things we can pull in there. We haven't really looked at budget data, we might do, but also text mining descriptions, like perhaps even some of our other work a little bit around sort of ontologies or vocabularies and using multiple terms. And we actually noticed you'd used agrivoc is mentioned as part of the tab vocabulary. And as Vanessa said, so that's more us sort of working on the portal. As Vanessa said, we have a really dynamic community, they can feed back, and I think really the message was this is a really, really important resource, and it can really help our sector. And so as we get more feedback, we can definitely feed that back to the IATI community. And so I think really our sort of message is, I think it's a great resource. I think there's sort of two areas that I'm sort of curious about is there are sector codes for livestock, but what we found is this portal's based on the 2 livestock sector codes, but there's agricultural sector code, and I think USAID report just under agriculture. So we know we're missing livestock projects, and so we're trying to work out if the problem is if we try to use particular terms to mine those agricultural research projects, it still may be that we might get a bit of noise. So for example, sometimes the Department of Livestock and Agriculture could be mentioned and it's not a livestock project. And so that's one area whether people can really think about what sector codes are used. But also one thing we were wondering about is we know that there are tags. We had a quick look at that and whether that's a route as well that could be used to really describe some of these activities. But I think there's a definite interest in IATI. I think it's a really amazing resource. And I think the little extra thing for us is getting these activities described as livestock will make all the difference. And that's the end. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you. We have a website, the portal's there, and we also have an email.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Ella. That was really, really interesting. I could see the comments. Everyone was very, very happy with that presentation and such. And I think I just wanted to pick up on one, but I think you covered it, Vanessa. There was a comment from Herman about what methodology you used to get to that subset of data, the livestock activities, and I think you mentioned that was just currently with sector codes. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And we know that we're missing some of those USAID projects, and so just because we know of them, and so what we're trying to work out is how some of the livestock, I mean, some of the livestock projects could be under human health as well, if they're a bit more on those zoonoses. So I think that's really what we want to explore.
Thank you. And you mentioned as well free text or text mining as well, which I know we colleagues have tried elsewhere in, for example, the COVID dashboard, where we're looking just for COVID and then return false positives around this is not COVID, for example. So yeah. Again, this is really helpful, and really thank you for bringing it into the cross-cutting themes part, and thank you as well for bringing this session into this wider session as well. I don't know if there's any other comments in the chat, and if not, we will turn to our panel and then we will combine everything, and this way it will become a little bit more free flow, I think. Okay, there's a very specific one there from Leo, thank you, or using oars and such. Okay. So yeah, I think we're on message now with this cross-cutting themes of trying to find subsets of data and activities to work with. And I'm happy to introduce 3 colleagues that we from 3 different organizations who are going to speak a bit more to this idea of, well, it's not an idea, this thing of cross-cutting themes. We have Zach Carmichael from the World Bank, who is involved in the global Alliance for Food Security, and Zach's going to speak shortly about their experience of IATI in this. And then we also have Renata Hallström-Assam from the European Commission, who will speak a bit more about their use of data and cross-cutting themes too. Oh, there you are, Renata, thank you. And last but not least, we have Sarah Schultz from USAID, who will again speak a bit more around this, and we'll try and elaborate. Thank you. This works really well, doesn't it? Cool. And then Louisa and Vanessa as well do feel free to come in and contribute. But we'll hear first of all from Zach. And Zach, it'd be great to hear about your recent use of IATI and such, and how is food security as a cross-cutting sector? Thank you.
Well, thank you to Stephen and to the organizers for kindly inviting me to provide a few remarks on behalf of the World Bank and on our work as part of the Global Alliance on Food Security. We call it GAFS for short. But this is an important exchange coming at a really critical time when our world finds itself facing a global crisis. At this very moment, many countries are facing food and nutrition security crisis, and the outlook is quite dire. The number of people facing acute food insecurity continues to grow at a very alarming rate. We're now seeing the highest levels of global acute food insecurity in the last 5 years, with 205 million people across 45 countries expected to be facing crisis levels. This is an increase of almost 30 million people since last year. And the drivers of these trends have been the lingering impacts of COVID-19. It's been the worsening impacts of climate change, conflict, and insecurity. And more recently, the crisis in Ukraine, which has affected the trade of commodities and increased the cost of fertilizers for agriculture across the globe. With so many countries facing such serious crisis risks, and at the same time, something we haven't seen since the world food price crisis in 2008, the international community came together to recognize the urgent need to track how the crisis is evolving in real time and to track what action is being taken globally. In May, the G7, along with the World Bank, launched the Global Alliance on Food Security for this very reason, to promote better coordination among partners and to begin this exercise of tracking the crisis in real time. And one of the deliverables of the Global Alliance is the development of a food and nutrition security dashboard that seeks to bring in existing food security indicators, financing, and research from across the community into one platform. And I'm happy to say that this living dashboard was formally launched as of yesterday. But that really brings us to our important collaborations with IATI and our other partners. One of the greatest challenges we've had is the ability to track in real time food and nutrition security responses across the globe. The reason why this has been so difficult is that food security by its very nature is cross-cutting. There are many avenues for food security crises to emerge, from rapidly increasing food prices to the onset of a major drought to the outbreak of conflict. And depending on the driver, the appropriate response will differ. And this makes tracking financing related to those responses that much harder. In short, we need to be able to distinguish which activities across many sectors are food security related and which ones are not. And to add to that complexity, we also need to sort financing across humanitarian partners, development partners, and bilateral donors. So IATI is one of the very few and valuable resources we have to begin pulling in such food security financing in real time. And so we're partnering very closely with the IATI colleagues to ensure that that data is integrated into this GAFS dashboard moving forward. There are, of course, a few challenges with this, particularly in parsing out which activities are food security related, given its multidimensional nature, and being able to drill down even further. Understanding how much funding is going to food security in a particular country is a good start, but it doesn't tell us much. It would be even better to know how much of that funding is addressing specific food security drivers the country is facing. For instance, within that food security envelope, it would be good to know how much of that support is going to producers, such as providing access to fertilizer, addressing access-related issues like social protection and safety nets, and so on. That said, we've been very encouraged by the experience that the IATI team has gained in tracking COVID-19 responses, which are lessons that we're applying to this real-time experience. IATI contains a significant amount of information, and our first order of operations is to really maximize the use of this data and test its limits to see how far we can actually drill down with our existing tools to meet our end user needs. And I would like to end just very quickly by expressing our sincere thanks to the IATI team for their continued support and collaborations on the dashboard. We look forward to continuing that work as the international response to the global crisis continues to scale up. Thanks a lot, Stephen.
Thank you, Zach. That's really helpful and great context as well. And certainly, as you say, it is a cross-cutting theme and something that's challenging to pin down and filter and parse, as you said, in IATI data. But I'm certain we will share the methodologies to find the data and welcome to the IATI community. And there's a great sense of collaboration amongst people to try and help with that, I think. So thank you, Zach. So Renate, the European Commission, I know that you have some big programs that you wanted to tag, for example, and also you've been working with SDGs, another cross-cutting theme. So it'd be great to hear some of your data use alongside your publishing. Renate, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Stephen. It's nice to be here and to talk about these topics, have the opportunity to share with you a bit. Maybe just one general reflection, which is a bit out of the topic, but still important for us. The European Commission is a big publisher. And for quite a long time, we have been very busy improving our data publication, and we still are. But for the last couple of years, I really see that there is a change in our perspective, and we are more and more concerned about data use, because that's what also the civil society needs. So we have worked on a visualization tool of ODA of financial flows of ODA we are providing, but not only us as the European Commission, but together with our 27 member states. And for that, we needed IATI tools. That's the EU Aid Explorer. We mentioned it at another of these sessions, these virtual community events. Now, afterwards, COVID came. And for COVID, I must say, we were a bit blocked. We could not really use the IATI because not all our member states publish in IATI. So that's what we talked about earlier, this gap that we needed to fill, and yeah, we couldn't use that. Now we are on a new project, and I think that's what you were referring to, Stephen. We want to track relevant projects of all our member states and ourselves in our partner countries. We call that the Team Europe initiatives. And clearly that needs functional international data sources if you don't want to rely on Excel sheets. And here we are working internally to somehow have all these the flags in place. And we are discussing with IATI to see how we can use the existing IATI standards to visualize that. And thank you very much to IATI Secretariat for the support on this. I think we are hopeful that this will soon be in production. Yeah, either be it a flag, and we are already using the flag for other topics, or a bit more special, like can't find the right term now. Yeah, I have a special vocabulary for these Team Europe initiatives. Yeah, and then the second point, so this is, I think, almost concluded, we hope so. And then the second point is that we are looking into how to visualize SDGs, again, mainly from our member states and ourselves. And there, I'm posing a problem, so we haven't found a solution yet. SDGs in IATI are quite scattered. This is because IATI does not give directives, which is also the beauty of IATI. But currently, we are wondering how to continue here. I guess we'll probably go to our member states and convince them to publish all in the same way, so to make it easier for us to get this information. So we could also get it if we, as it is right now, but of course it's more complicated to retrieve it. So yes, challenges, but also the assurance that we have good tools to find solutions and a nice community to be able to work together. So yeah, I think in times where data and communication becomes more and more important, that's much appreciated. Thank you for the collaboration.
Thank you, Renata. That's really helpful as well. Certainly, I think we should, as a community, look back at the SDG guidance that we have and the practice that's followed, and to help colleagues be more consistent, perhaps around that would be really great. And I think that what you describe as well with the Team Europe initiatives is a real theme that's coming through, I see, where organizations are publishing activities and we need to relate the activities, but maybe not bound them financially or such things. They're working together on a certain bespoke vocabulary theme, as you described. So I hope we can use the specific tag function of IATI for that. But again, there's lots of ways and mechanisms we can do that, and sharing best practice would be really helpful. So thank you for your contribution. And we'll now to Sarah from USAID, and we've talked briefly around humanitarian scope, I think, Sarah, and we also we got into the weeds, I think, didn't we, about transactions and sector codes and other things at the transaction level. So Sarah, how is the cost-cutting themes working for you and colleagues at USAID?
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. And I'll just pile on to what we're already saying, just yet another reason and another instance where we would love to see the tag functionality, enhanced and better followed. It's great to hear that SEBI's been able to use IATI data to gain insights around their cross-cutting issues. And of course, now we've heard a couple of other examples. I'll echo Renata quickly to note that USAID is also continuing our transition from focusing on data publishing to becoming a frequent data IATI user ourselves. And so in that process, we often need to conduct similar analyses, of course, and we are looking to IATI to help answer some of these questions. Just like everyone else, unfortunately, we have found this type of analysis particularly challenging, especially in a crisis situation. So, for example, when the crisis response itself is the cross-cutting issue that we're trying to track. So, for example, we're unable to easily determine the global donor response to COVID-19. And we worked quite closely with your team to try and figure that out in the early days and underwent some of the same methodologies we're seeing here. We currently face the same challenge in trying to answer the question of how much donors are contributing to the response effort in Ukraine, and of course, the global food insecurity too. These efforts that we've seen already today have done great strides in that, but it's not something that a common user can go and easily figure out. So I think that's a problem for us. Of course, it's not just a US government issue. These are global questions. There isn't yet a single trusted data source that can easily and quickly answer these. And that's our key message today. This is a priority for USAID and the US government leadership. We know from the spreadsheets that are being shared around many of your organizations that it's a priority for many of your leaderships as well. Of course, we know the DAC data provides official verified ODA, but it's got a 1.5-year time lag. FTS is a trusted source, but only for humanitarian assistance. So IATI is, the more timely and more complete alternative to these, and it's seemingly the natural solution. As far as we understand, it was designed to fill this exact type of gap. So we just haven't been able to do so easily yet for sort of 2 identified reasons. I'll actually add a third that I'm going to start right at the beginning, which is just the level of difficulty in identifying. I mean, Herman raised it. Everyone who's presented so far, in identifying which of the many IATI activities actually relate, to the specific cross-cutting issue, right? So that's the initial, of course, that's the initial difficulty. So I'll also just add that the funding tags, which I do think are a natural solution to some of these cross-cutting issues and to tracking them, they can be useful in identifying activities that address cross-cutting issues, of course, but they're just not implemented quickly or uniformly enough in a crisis situation. Really, at this point, we're not able to use them. So if the uptake of IATI's tags could be improved, we might be able to make huge strides in estimating our donor responses to crises. USAID is currently looking into how we can improve our own use of both tags and HRP codes. We did go into that. A second limitation that we identified is really that the standard is currently designed around the activity. Most publishers still report fields like sector, country, and certainly tags at the activity level. So what this means is that a $50 million activity could be tagged to 5 different cross-cutting issues, right? So we're unable still to be able to isolate the funding amount that goes to any one of these issues. So as much as the standard will allow, USAID reports our data at the transaction level. We consider this best practice, but we can't yet tag those transactions. We can't use the tag at the transaction level. So we would, our second takeaway here is really to advocate for more organizations to report at the transaction level as much as possible, because of course we can always aggregate, but if the data doesn't exist disaggregated, we just can't find it. And then also for the standard to create a space for transaction level tagging. So in the meantime, and until we can resolve these challenges, we'll continue to answer these pressing funding questions through labor-intensive manual data calls that we're currently tracking in spreadsheets. We're getting this question from leadership right now about the Ukraine response, and the answer is in very high demand, and we just can't answer it with IATI data right now. So we'll keep working on it manually until we can figure this out. But IATI is built to address these global donor gaps in a timely manner. So we're really keen to continue the discussion in the community and to help realize that purpose. And USAID is invested in continuous improvement, of course, of the IATI data and systems. And we very much look forward to hearing from everyone else in the discussion portion or after the VCE as we continue to try and improve these issues that I think really first came to light with COVID and trying to track COVID funding. So thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really interesting. Thank you for your thoughts on that and the reality check as well. And we've all had those spreadsheets and the emails, so certainly it's not going away. I think there's a real call there, perhaps, to the Secretariat and the board for how can I call it, a tag working group, a tag technical working group. How do we get tags more widespread, and how do we socialize the use of tags and improve the efficiency and speed of that? So. Great. I would. I think.
Can I quickly come in there?
Yes.
This is Pelle. I'm on the IATI board, and as you, I'm not sure if you see me, but as you might know, we're in Copenhagen right now with the IATI board, and we just had a 2-day board meeting, I'm the first one to mention this to you. Then we've just decided that we will want to reinstate the data use working group, but also set up a technical working group and a data publisher working group. So keep an eye on IATI Connect, because we're going to invite you to join those groups within a couple of weeks, because we feel the need that we need a more designated place for these kinds of discussions to take place, but we also need a community to set the agenda for which topics should we cover first, etc. So keep an eye on your inbox, keep an eye on IATI Connect, because we'll be inviting you for those working groups very soon.
Thank you, Pelle. That's great news. Working groups to come through, and even maybe a tag working group. If you get the joke. I'm sorry about that. That's really bad.
Let's reinstate the tag, yes.
And I know the contribution from Kalin, from colleague from the European Commission as well, about how tags are useful, but even more useful with vocabularies, which again, I think the original discussion around tags we had was about using AgriVoc. So we've come full circle, I think, which is very encouraging, maybe. Louise, hopefully you're here. We had another thought as well, I think, thinking on, okay, if we get things set up and we agree that we need to do this. Louise made a really interesting point, which I'll invite you to ask the panelists and others now, I think, about how do people do this?
Yeah, it was really about how can you actually engage with the community, and in particular the people inputting the information, so that they sort of become more familiar with the potential of IATI and sort of do the best possible job within their organizations of describing the data, really, because you know, those descriptions make a big difference for us. So sort of like whether they can use the tags or think about the sector codes, but it's really more that engagement, what potential there is to sort of communicate that really.
So why would somebody using a system that's going to generate IATI data, why would they care to tag or annotate or describe that information? What would motivate them? It's a tricky question, but maybe someone can take this.
I'm sure there are more answers than just USAIDs, but I can kick it off, I guess. You know, we have the benefit of having a lot of rules in place where we sort of have to make people have to do things if we put it into guidance and policy. But I think on top of that, you know, we are able to use systems and other kind of internal flagging systems that we're using for budgetary purposes. And we can pull tags off of that. We can pull purpose codes, things like that we're using. We use internal other systems that we can kind of map things over to. But in terms of motivation, you know, we try and share the IATI resources with our colleagues in the field who are implementing our activities. We do regular demonstrations and we try and share these platforms, both the IATI platform, but also our internal, like foreignassistance.gov, and show them where their data is ending up. So when I think people can see, wow, I collected that data last month and here it is on a public website, then it just really closes a huge gap there, I think, in motivating folks to tag it as much as possible, because sometimes they see it and there's no description, or they'll see it and say, well, wait, you know, I didn't realize we weren't including this critical piece of information for people. And so they'll go back and want to improve it at source. It's quite difficult, you know, to do that globally, but that's sort of one of our tools that we have at our disposal.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that's the great point there. When people realize their data is to become public and used is really interesting. I know, Renata, when we've worked with colleagues in the Commission and they've used the internal system and we've pointed out which fields become IATI, that's a real eye-opener as well. I think people do see that, I think.
Yes, or if you have a visualization tool and you realize that there is a gap or there is something missing, and then you tell people, well, we can only visualize what we have. So if you don't give the right input, then that's what it shows. So that's why I think data use is really important to improve data quality. Yeah.
Thank you. And to follow on, thank you, Renata. To follow on to that, Zach, you said yesterday was the launch of the dashboard on food security, and that's going to and will use IATI data very actively. How do you think that will help people understand and see where IATI data is in use, but maybe take it out of the context of IATI, you know, into another domain?
No, thanks, Stephen. I think certainly just piggybacking off of Sarah's comments, you know, it's a bit of a black box for us to understand this world of financing on the food security front, just because it goes across so many different sectors. So the most we can do, I think, as best practice, is be extremely transparent with how far we can take the data, right? Write up the methodology, explain exactly where the data comes from. And I think when we're methodical in that way, it also provides a means for us to systematically look at those gaps and to see whether or not there are means of filling those gaps. I think on the first question that you asked, I agree with Sarah and Renata. Tagging must be a corporate priority. And we don't always have the same type of priorities across different organizations and partners, and the same use or needs for that type of information. For an institution like the World Bank, we're a major user of information. So we tend to see a lot of these gaps. But I think I'm really encouraged by the idea of the board taking this on, the IATI board taking this on and having a technical working group to discuss this, because this is not an issue that can be solved overnight. It requires a lot of consensus building. It requires a lot of people coming on board to say, yes, we want to prioritize this exercise. And I think examples like the dashboard help illustrate exactly where those gaps are and what's needed to fill that. So I think it can support that dialogue.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you, everybody. We're coming to a close, and I promised you 2 interactive polls. So the second one is coming up. And Gary, if you could kindly put the poll up. I've forgotten how it's termed, so thank you. So really thinking about this issue, this topic we've got onto next about, okay, we see it all as our responsibility to better annotate, tag, describe data so we can get to these cross-cutting themes. So what are you interested in helping the IATI community? And by you, I mean you, everybody. What could you help with? And could you help with collaborating on better guidance materials? Can you explain IATI to others? Promote case studies like we've seen today? Or even join those technical working groups that Pella described? It's almost as if we minted this poll during the conversation. So please click as many boxes as you can, or as you're interested in, and maybe this is the call to action for us coming up. I'll give you 20 more seconds to choose as many of those boxes that interest you as you can, and maybe this is our next step as a community to get together, to write down things, to talk to each other, talk about great things that are happening, and some of us to get together in technical working groups and argue about tags, discuss tags. Gary, can we see the results, please? Coming up. Oh, look at this. Oh, so not so many people want to write down things. Yeah, and a good sense of people wanting to talk about IATI, promote the case studies, and Pelle, we've got 63% of the people here. How many people are here? 48. If someone can do the maths, we've got a good group of people want to join the tag working group.
This will be a crowd. Yes. I'm subscribing for a course in crowd management now.
Thank you, Gary, from Zoom for the poll. If we can take that down, thank you. So we're just at time. That was a great conversation and a great presentation. So I'd like to thank all colleagues for joining us, and all colleagues for joining in the conversation. If we can do a virtual round of applause, as we would, and go and have a coffee in the lobby and carry on the conversation, that would be great. But thank you, everybody. Really helpful, really great. And we'll see everyone in the next session. Thank you. Oh yeah, a little hand thing. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.